Some voices carry more than melody. Some carry the full weight of a life quietly breaking and being slowly rebuilt. Wes Hampton's tenor has floated over packed auditoriums for 2 decades, clean and bright and certain, the kind of sound that makes strangers weep without fully understanding why. But the man behind that voice has spent years carrying things the applause never reached. A marriage that nearly dissolved in silence, a grief so sudden it left him kneeling on a dressing room floor unable to cry, and a controversy that spread across gospel music communities before he'd said a single word in his own defense. What follows is not the version of Wes Hampton that appears on stage with the Gaither Vocal Band. It's the version that sat across from a counselor, admitting he'd been failing the people he loved most. The version that boarded a flight home to bury his younger sister. The version that chose grace when anger would have been far easier to reach for. Memphis, Tennessee gave him the birthplace in 1977, but Birmingham, Alabama shaped everything that followed. Growing up in a city with deep roots in faith and Southern gospel music, Wes was drawn to harmony before he could fully form sentences. Harmonizing in the back seat of the family car at 3 years old, according to his mother, who never let that detail go unmentioned. Church became his first stage, and his voice drew attention almost immediately, an exceptional range carrying a warmth that didn't feel trained so much as simply present. He moved through high school choirs and local musicals, building technique along the way. But the education that mattered most happened on Sunday mornings when he watched what a well-placed note could do to a room full of tired, heavy people. That observation never left him, and it shaped every performance decision he would make for the next 30 years. He enrolled to study psychology, first at TCA Nazarene, and then at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, drawn to the idea of understanding human pain from the inside out. But somewhere in those years, the calling clarified. His gift wasn't for the clinical office, it was for the platform, and his training only sharpened that gift by teaching him to read an audience not simply as listeners, but as people carrying specific, identifiable weights. The ability to feel what a crowd needs before they articulate it themselves became the quiet engine beneath every performance he gave, and it was rooted not in charisma alone, but in a genuine clinical understanding of human suffering. That combination of emotional intelligence and spiritual conviction was unusual, and it showed. The national moment arrived in 2005 when Wes joined the Gaither Vocal Band, one of the most respected names in Southern gospel music and Christian music broadly. He wasn't attempting to replicate what previous tenors had done. His tone was distinctly his own, clear and emotionally direct, and it repositioned the group's sound for a new generation without abandoning what made the Gaither Homecoming series beloved across decades of devoted listeners. Songs like "I'll Pray for You," "Jesus is Everywhere," and "These Are They" became defining moments in his catalog, performances that audiences returned to not simply for the musicianship, but for what they felt during those few minutes of worship. His presence on stage communicated something that sheet music alone cannot produce, and Christian communities across the country responded to it with the kind of loyalty that outlasts trends. Wes and Andrea built their marriage in the late 1990s around faith, family, and a shared understanding of what they wanted their life to look like. 4 sons came, and fatherhood, by Wes's own account, became the calling that mattered most to him. But touring at the level the Gaither Vocal Band operates means weeks away at a stretch, months accumulated across years of hotel rooms in unfamiliar cities, and the slow erosion of ordinary domestic life. Andrea held the household together across those years, managing school, discipline, illness, and the daily decisions that accumulate into a full life largely alone. She carried that weight without much visible complaint, and the silence of that carrying eventually became the loudest thing in their marriage. What nobody expected was that the fracture would reveal itself not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a quiet accumulation of distance. They weren't in conflict in any obvious way. They were simply becoming strangers operating a household together. And Andrea was the one who named it first and refused to let the naming go unanswered. She pushed for counseling, not because the marriage was ending, but because she could feel it hollowing out from the inside, and she wasn't willing to stand by while that continued. Counseling required Wes to stop moving long enough to actually hear what his absence had cost, and what he heard was not easy to sit with. Andrea told him she felt invisible, not unloved exactly, but consistently unseen, present in the same rooms but absent from his genuine attention. He sat with the guilt of missed birthdays, of arriving home to children who had shifted and grown in ways he'd failed to notice, of a wife who had been managing everything while he ministered to strangers in other cities and called it purpose. The process of rebuilding was slow and uncomfortable, the way genuine change almost always is. He cut back on touring and began turning down optional engagements without apology. Andrea reclaimed parts of herself that had been quietly buried under the weight of being a gospel singer's wife, returning to writing and regular Bible study. Wes later described the shift at a marriage seminar in words that carried the specific weight of someone who learned the lesson the hard way. It wasn't his wife's patience that saved his ministry. It was her honesty. And she reminded him that gaining the world's attention while losing your household leaves you with nothing. What they rebuilt from that point carried more honesty than what they had before, and they began quietly mentoring other couples through the same difficult territory they'd barely navigated themselves. In 2012, something happened that no amount of ministry experience prepares a person to absorb. Wes's younger sister Lauren died suddenly at 28 years old from complications of a rare autoimmune disease, and he was on tour when the call came through. He described dropping to his knees in the dressing room and finding that he couldn't cry at all. His soul, as he put it, simply going mute. The grief that followed was the kind that reshapes a person at a level that performance cannot conceal. He returned to the stage weeks later with his heart still heavy and chose not to hide what he was carrying from the audiences who came to hear him. Songs like "Glorious Impossible" and "Sometimes It Takes a Mountain" became something fundamentally different in his hands after that loss. Not performances, but confessions. Not worship leadership, but honest lament. He later wrote that grief is not a failure of faith, only the unavoidable cost of having loved someone fully and then losing them. Lauren's death pushed him toward a more open conversation about mental health within the Christian community, a space where that conversation had long been treated as incompatible with strong belief. He began saying plainly what many believers felt privately, that loving Jesus and hurting deeply are not contradictions, and pretending otherwise helps no one. The controversy that surfaced in 2019 caught him mid-stride and spread faster than any correction could travel. Rumors moved across gospel music blogs and Facebook communities, claiming he had walked off a tour date following a backstage argument with another performer, with speculation attributing the fallout to ego and artistic friction. The headlines ran hard with the story. Conflict in the camp, gospel artists feuding, Gaither losing Wes Hampton. None of it was verified. He remained quiet for several days, then posted something measured and deliberately calm. Stories that are not entirely true circulate sometimes, and while differences may arise, love and unity always take precedence. He didn't engage further, didn't escalate, didn't try to out-narrate the rumor with a louder counter-narrative. What hurt him most, privately, wasn't the false claim itself. It was that assumptions had calcified into perception before he'd had the opportunity to say a single word. He never left the Gaither Vocal Band. In the months that followed, his performances grew more focused and intentional, not defensive in tone, but deliberate in purpose, a quiet demonstration that his calling sits above any headline that runs without his input. His solo work continued alongside the group, with albums like A Man Like Me and Reality, pressing into themes of doubt, struggle, and the specific kind of hope that survives contact with actual difficulty, rather than existing only in comfortable distance from it. Music is his processing, not just his performance, a distinction he has made clearly in interviews, and one that separates artists who perform worship from those who genuinely inhabit it. Mentoring younger voices in the gospel music world has also become a growing part of his time, passing on what he knows about longevity in a demanding industry, about staying grounded when the platform expands, and about the enduring difference between being widely known and being quietly faithful to the thing that called you in the first place. What remains when you pull back from the stage lights and the tour schedules and the recordings is a man who has refused to package his life into something easier to look at. His marriage nearly came apart in the quiet, not with a scandal, but with the ordinary erosion of two people drifting past each other. He buried a sister at 28. He watched a rumor travel faster than truth and chose not to fight it with noise. And through all of it, the voice kept carrying. Not because the life behind it was untouched, but because it was genuinely real, pressed and shaped by the same experiences he sings about when the lights lower and thousands of people feel, for a few minutes, like someone understands exactly where they are. That is the actual legacy, not the notes, the life that earns them.